Welcome to the final session in our Forward Momentum During Global Shocks, a series of Business Lightning Talks series. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of our colleagues around the world. My name is Carla Ruffer, and I am the Outreach Coordinator for the Center for European Studies at the University of Florida. I'm joined by my colleagues at the South Asia Institute at the University of Texas at Austin, Texas A&M Center for International Business, and the Georgia Tech Scheller College of Business Center for International Business Education and Research. This event is also co-sponsored by the George Washington University Center for International Business Education and Research, Indiana University Center for International Business Education and Research, San Diego State University Fowler College of Business, the University of Maryland Robert H. Smith School of Business Center for Global Business, and the University of Washington Foster School of Business Global Business Center. The subject of global shocks is broad. This can encompass war, pandemics, supply chains, inflation, and more. The speakers today will focus on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. How are businesses adapting to these SDGs? Our speakers will touch on the role of SDGs in the financial, maritime, and multinational enterprise fields. A few brief housekeeping notes. Each speaker will present for about 15 minutes. These talks are designed to provide flashes of information and insight. We will have a few moments for Q&A at the end. If you are interested in asking a question, please submit that through the Q&A button. You can submit these questions at any time during the presentation. If you have a specific speaker you'd like to address, please include that with your question. And when you leave the webinar, you'll be taken to a very quick 6-question survey. Your feedback helps us to provide quality programming like this in the future. This series is being recorded and it will be shared on our center's websites. Without further ado, let's begin. Our first speaker is Meeta Kothare. Her talk is Sustainable Finance, Rethinking Finance to Accelerate Progress Towards UNSDGs. Dr. Kothare is Professor of Practice in the McCombs School of Business and the LBJ School of Public Affairs. She is the Managing Director of the Global Sustainability Leadership Institute. Previously, she served as the inaugural Managing Director of the Social Innovation Initiative at McCombs. Kothare has over 25 years of academic, business, and social sector experience. Her areas of expertise include impact and sustainable finance, impact measurement, systems change, and social entrepreneurship. She is the recipient of the 2019 President's Award for Global Learning at UT for her team's research in Puebla, Mexico. She holds a PhD in finance and an MS in applied economics from the University of Rochester and an MBA from the University of Georgia. With that, I will hand it over to Dr. Kothare.
Thank you, Carla. And I'm going to share my screen here in a second. Thank you for this invitation. I'm honored to be speaking here at the invitation of the South Asia Institute at UT. My talk today is about sustainable finance, rethinking finance for the UN SDGs. Since I am the first speaker, I thought I might talk just very briefly about what the SDGs are. These are 17 intersectional goals that were set up by the UN General Assembly in 2015. They are essentially created with the vision of peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and in the future. Most targets were considered to be achievable by 2030. And that is the subject of our discussion today. What the SDGs really do the most in terms of addressing issues is really the biggest intersection between climate change and extreme inequality. We've seen this happening particularly in developing countries, and we saw this particularly in India and Pakistan this year. Extremely cruel summer in Delhi, extreme flooding in Pakistan. We've seen, we think of Bangladesh as a flooding nation, but this was very much a different scenario. So that's just an example of what's going on. The SDGs have a huge gap right now in terms of the global leadership meeting 2030 targets. Pre-COVID, we had a financing gap for SDGs of $2.5 trillion. Post-COVID, that is considered to be about $4.2 trillion per year of financing that we need to get there. Now, fixing the gap towards reaching the SDGs has many solutions. Starting from the right on the slide, there's policy, regulatory oversight. We need innovation. We need new ideas for especially the climate transition. We need public finance, government spending, fiscal policies, all of that, direct foreign assistance. But we also need private finance, and that's the topic of my presentation today. When we think about this for a moment. Total global assets in financial institutions in 2021 were $468 trillion. The total SDG funding gap that I just mentioned per year is $4.2 trillion. So if just 1% of total financial assets were assigned to sustainable finance, it would suffice to fill this gap. Now, this is an oversimplified scenario, but think about the size of private sector finance and financial institutions, and you can imagine the possibilities through sustainability. Historically, in finance, we've always considered the risk-return trade-off. Higher the risk, maybe potentially higher returns, but certainly with greater risk. Low risk brings potentially lower returns. There's no free lunch in finance. We always talk about that. But what about impact? Every investment has impact, positive or negative, even though we haven't really talked about it. In economics, we've been taught and we teach about externalities. The goal of the private sector is to make money, profits, maximize shareholder wealth, and forget about externalities like pollution and effects on underserved communities. But the reality is that those impacts remain, and they're positive or negative. So every investment has an impact return and an impact risk, whether we like it or not. For instance, the smartphone has been our most amazing innovation of the 21st century. It has helped in many ways, even in terms of social impact, allowing us to, for instance, deliver healthcare to the last mile. But it has also brought about significant changes in the way we live, particularly a growing attention deficit among a younger generation of students and people, potential risk to mental health. Social media platforms that were enabled by these innovations have also created their own levels of misinformation. So impact has always been there. We just have to learn to manage and measure it. The other point I want to make is that positive impact does not necessarily imply lower financial returns. We've seen evidence of that. Of course, concessions are necessary in many cases, particularly when you're thinking about investing in developing markets, when you're making markets, actually creating markets, and so on. So I want to address some of that. So two basic areas of sustainable finance that I wanted to talk about was impact investing and what we call ESG investing. The criteria there's an overlap between the two, but we often think about these two as somewhat different. When we think about impact investing, we think about investments made into companies and organizations and funds with the intention to generate social and environmental impact alongside a financial return. And when I say intention, it means not just saying we want to do it, but a commitment to managing and measuring that impact alongside the investee. This is often in private debt and equity markets, but we see impact investing increasingly in public markets too. So to bring to life some of these investments, particularly in the region that my hosts are most interested in, the South Asian market, let's take some examples. So on the right-hand side at the bottom, I have investors, and on the left-hand side, some of their investments. So for instance, TPG is a big private equity company here in the US, and their RISE fund has invested in Frontier Markets. Now, Frontier Markets is a startup that is based in India and provides a platform and an app to connect rural consumers, especially women, in the last mile. That's an example of an impact investment. The Omidyar network, which is a huge systems changing impact investor, invests in another fund called the SEAF, which is the SEAF India Agribusiness Fund. That fund in turn targets small and medium enterprises in the agribusiness value chain in India. Avishkar Group, for instance, has Avishkar Capital. Avishkar Capital is based in India, and it's invested, for example, in Share Microfin Limited, which provides financial and other services to marginalized populations, women, and rural and semi-urban Indian areas. These are some examples of how investors are investing in developing countries in both Asia and Africa. BankQ is an organization that provides identity through blockchain, has worked in Myanmar among refugees there, Syria, and other places. Now, these are impact investments, but then to the more controversial area of ESG investing. ESG investing are investments made with consideration given to environmental, social, and governance implications of the investment. It does not mean that these companies were necessarily started with the intention to create an impact, but it's investments in companies that score high on these ESG criteria. So again, taking the right-hand side here, we have large institutional investors like the Norwegian Government Pension Fund, the Sovereign Wealth Fund. We have State Street, which is an investment, which is an asset manager here in the US. We have pension funds like Nuveen, which is the impact arm of TIA Craft Pensions. All of these might invest in companies like Next Era Energy, which is dedicated to renewable energy, or to a company like Unilever in the US, which under its just retired Paul Polman has done amazing work in sustainability. And I'll leave that to my colleague, to my next speaker here, John, to talk about the companies that are doing this kind of work. Or they might invest in a company like Infosys in India, which is ranked #1 by ESG criteria in all of India. Generally, when investors do this, they're looking at material factors only. They're looking at factors that affect their own opportunities for return and risk in their investment analysis. So mostly it's publicly traded securities. So the impact of these is very different from impact investments. The financing mechanisms and the investor types in both are huge and varied. There are financing mechanisms that are being created almost all the time. This year has seen, the last couple of years have seen an increase in bonds that are green bonds, social bonds, sustainability-linked bonds. All of these link the activities of the investee to very specific projects that provide to make it greener, more socially impactful, more sustainable, and allows debt holders to control some of these outcomes. Of course, we've always had equity investing. Fintech and microcredit has been particularly useful in developing countries. Fintech especially has taken off a lot for financial inclusion purposes, bringing tech to bring financial inclusion and awareness. But beyond that, investors can also provide loan guarantees for enabling other investments to participate. And credit lines. We even see foundations providing grants for technical assistance that allows younger companies to become investor ready. So many different products and processes are being created, including crowdfunding, that are making the process a little more equitable for the communities that are affected. And investor types includes everything from universal asset owners like pension funds who are worried about long-term risks as well as sort of the systematic risk in the market to venture capital, to specific impact investors, philanthropic foundations, and banks and financial services, as well as individuals. 2021 was a banner year for ESG and impact-related investments. $18 trillion of ESG assets existed globally. We had impact investing hit the $1 trillion mark. We had record commitments to net zero, but then we also had calls for accountability and transparency. The European Union started its SFDR, its disclosure regulation process. The IFRS, the Accounting Standards Board across the globe, announced the creation of the ISSB for a consolidation of accounting standards boards. And all of this was going well despite the previous year spent in the pandemic. But then the world changed in 2022. The war on Ukraine created its own risks. We are seeing increasing inflation. Developing countries are in debt crises of all kinds. Sri Lanka, we know the story from the beginning of this year. And there are growing accusations as the ESG market has grown, and many of them are very valid. We've also seen regulation and the criticisms and critiques of that as well. Well, what's it looking like in this context, particularly in areas of South Asia? India, Pakistan, Bangladesh are some of the most active countries for impact investing in this region. There are huge investment opportunities, lots of startup activity that can support the energy transition. But addressing poverty and inequality with that is going to be significantly harder. McKinsey estimates that just green businesses, the opportunity for investing there is up to $5 trillion in 11 broad sectors, ranging from transportation and hydrogen and electric vehicles, of course, and transportation, waste and carbon management. But there are challenges. We're going to see more standardization of disclosure. We'll see more impact measurement tools. We'll see more regulation. COP27 brought about the question of loss and damage for the first time. All great developments. The problems, though, are that we need more local wealthy investors to understand the impacts of impact investing. We need better collaborations between development finance institutions and local governments for context-specific investing. We need more investment products and processes that give voice to affected communities. Climate change affects the entire world. It doesn't matter that the most polluted cities in the world are in South Asia. What matters is the air we breathe is affected by them everywhere. But the issues are more difficult. A just climate transition is almost a cliche these days, but that is really important. And the only way we can do it is by giving voice to developing nations, by giving voice to the communities that are most affected by climate change. And hopefully we are learning better how to do these investments and support these communities better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kothare. Our next speaker is John R. McIntyre. His talk is the United Nations SDGs and the role of the multinational enterprise. Dr. McIntyre is founding director of the Georgia Tech Center for International Business Education and Research, or CIBER, a national center of excellence since 1993, and a professor of strategy and innovation at the Scheller College of Business with joint appointment in international economic relations at the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs, Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, Georgia. Former fellow and research associate at the Dean Russ Center for International Law, University of Georgia Law School. He received his graduate education at McGill, Strasberg, and Northeastern Universities, obtaining his PhD at the University of Georgia. Author of 13 books and over 100 trade and referred journal articles. Honorary professor at the University of Lorraine, France. Recipient of the Georgia Tech-wide Denning Globalization Award, the Georgia Governor's Award for International Education. recipient of the French National Order of Merit, Knight rank, for work in promoting U.S. and French foreign direct investment. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Carla, and congratulations for putting together the series. And thank you, Meeta, for clarifying for me the precise meaning of impact investment and differentiating it from other forms of investment impacting UNSDGs. My talk today is really focused on research approaches. I will not so much be talking about what it is multinational enterprises do or do not do, but rather what is the status of the intersect between the field of international business, broadly understood, and the topic of UNSDGs and their place in the private sector. So next slide. I too have selected the standard colorful image, which is an inspirational and aspirational reference. I will say this, I may not share Meeta's optimistic view for the future. It is very impressive to see the opportunities in green financing. But in general, what we can say is that for each of the 17 goals, which go much beyond climate, but climate, of course, being the most salient, we have seen a drastic falling behind in achieving the goals and the multiple targets under each of the goals. And in large measure, due to COVID-19, 2 years of really abeyance in the process of implementation. And there is research indicating that we're way behind. Needless to say, the Russo-Ukrainian war has an impact too, but I'm not sure there is a substitution in defense investment and investment in green technology or UNSDG efforts. What I do note, however, is that it's a very mixed picture. For example, since you are a European Union funded center, I note that last night, late in the night, the European Parliament voted its intention to ban all importations of products derived from deforestation, particularly in Brazil, but elsewhere. Indonesia comes to mind. That would include cacao, it would include coffee and soy. Now, knowing the institution, the decision-making institutions of the European Union, we're a long way from actually giving force of law to this desire noted last night by a vote of the European Parliament. But it is, in a way, I guess, if you are a very optimistic person, a way to consider that progress is being made, be it symbolically. I note also that among US millennials, over 40% involved in the early stage of their career in recruiting consider the commitment of the prospective firm where they're going to be employed, their commitment to sustainability as a salient feature in making a decision to really join a particular corporation. So that in a sense, translating the goals and their multiple targets is really a challenge. It's a set of aspirations inspiring us, but the challenge is very much with us. The time is extremely limited. We count 7 years to go before the fateful deadline of 2030. For our part, at the Georgia Tech Center for International Business Education and Research, one of the 16 such centers, we started early. We created in 2006 something which goes by the name of MESD. I've always thought it sounded more like a disease entity than a not-for-profit academic consortium, but that's exactly what it is. It's the Multinational Enterprise and Sustainable Development Consortium, which we put together with our colleagues at the University of Lorraine in Eastern France. And there is a reason for that, because Georgia Tech has had a physical campus located in the city of Metz, in the midst of Lorraine, the region of Lorraine, since 1989, which has about 700 plus graduate students, largely in engineering, including environmental engineering. So we created this organization in 2006, which has had so far 6 3-day research events in various locations, in India, in Denmark, in France, in the United States. We're in fact looking forward to our next event, and we are planning to have it at the end of 2023. That would be number 7, and it would either be in Paris or in Atlanta, with a possibility of India. We're in the midst of deciding. So if you can provide a feedback on a good location for maximum coverage. And we're in the process of defining topical coverage, because as you can see from the next slide, we have produced a body of literature going really back to the creation of MESD, Multinational Enterprise and Sustainable Development, in the form of books, in the form of special issues, which has really allowed the opportunity for young and not so young scholars to jumpstart their research. At first, the research obviously was not focused on the UNSDGs, even though the millennial goals existed prior to 2015. We really focused at first on the traditional corporate social responsibility and to a lesser extent, ethics as practiced in the multinational enterprise. So you can see here the highlights. I don't have time to really identify the research findings of each of these 9 bullet points I have selected, but visually they are reflected in the following slide. Jim, if you turn, you will see the 5 books. It's a series we have produced. The last one sits right smack in the middle. It's the role of the multinational enterprise in supporting the United Nations SDGs, in which we really make a dent in a very complex topic. And we address about 7 out of the 17 SDGs through a variety of scholarly publications. I encourage you to acquire the book. For those of you here today, if you send me your address, physical address, I'll be glad to provide a free copy of that last publication. We also do quite a bit of work with the Journal of Cleaner Production, which has a factor ranking that's very high. It's a multidisciplinary journal. We also work very closely with Organisation Responsable, which is a French quarterly, and to a lesser extent with the Multinational Business Review in putting together very specialized issues on topics of corporate social responsibility in the multinational. And now, of course, it has taken the form of really focusing outright on the SDGs. So I want to say a few words about the research landscape of the intersect of multinational enterprise, but more broadly, the private sector and SDGs. And what we have found, really looking at published literature, looking at bibliometric analysis of what is available, what is published, what has caught the attention of scholars in producing referee journal publications, which have made an impact, is that it's requiring a shift from the traditional mainline academic silo emphasis we often find, not surprisingly, coming out of business academia. And in order to really properly address SDG M&E research, what is required is enhanced multidisciplinarity and overcoming at one and the same time the obstacles of academic silo. This point in and of itself is a huge debate in American academia, but also in European academia and other regions and countries, as to what kind of output do you expect from committed academics who are delving into really what is increasingly appearing, what used to be known in public policy as wicked problems and complexity. A good example of that is a publication by my colleague Lorraine Eden, a past president of the Academy of International Business, of a landmark piece in the Journal of International Business Policy on SDG 5, gender equality, in which she and colleagues have really looked at the wicked problem of dealing with gender equality across societies and in multinational operations. As you can imagine, it's a problem that has many facets. If you look at perhaps Middle Eastern locations or South Asian locations or North American locations in addressing that particular SDG. It's one of the harder SDGs to look at, in contradistinctions to issues of global climate, where the indicators are hopefully more readily available. Additionally, and I need to move quickly through those bullets, the research requires addressing multiple stakeholders' processes, as opposed to really having a single unit of analysis. In addition to that, the impact of digitalization, which I think was mentioned indirectly by Meeta when she mentioned the impact of fintech and other modalities on creating new opportunities to really implement some of the SDGs. Of course, the issue of financing, we have just had an overview presentation, an excellent overview presentation. Financing the SDGs is a very salient issue, not only at the macro, but the micro level. At the micro level, of course, you have all manners of investment possibilities, as recapped by the slide you put together from McKinsey. But what we have seen at Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, COP27, in addressing loss and damage, is that there is a gap, not unlike the gap that existed in the 1960s in UNCTAD, the United Nations Committee on Trade and Development, dividing really the advanced post-industrial economies of the OECD and the developing emerging frontier economies as to who is responsible for what and who should make contributions to alleviate the resulting issues from weather, climate changes. An additional challenge of the research landscape is that as we develop new metrics, practical-oriented metrics, and I note that UNCTAD itself has put in place a toolkit for multinationals to measure their progress along the timeline leading to 2030, that those metrics provide a rich opportunity for scholars to tap, not tape, into existing databases and turn it into a publishable research that will accrue to a body of literature leading hopefully to action. Finally, and this is very tempting, and it's very much in the nature of the work we have done, zooming in on specific industry sectors and topics. For example, the SDGs and the mining sector, the SDG and financial technologies provides a rich line of research that is often not pursued in traditional international business outlets. And so in a sense, what we have here is very much the clarion call of the RRBM, and I urge you, if you have not joined, to do so, of the Responsible Research in Business and Management Forum, created among others by Anne Sui, past president of the Academy of Management. It's really an opportunity to rejuvenate IB scholarship by providing opportunities to look at new models which encompass broader social issues. And that is very much in the nature of the work we at GT CIBER in Atlanta, Georgia, have been conducting. In this regard, I went out of my way to bring to your attention, and the videotape is available, a program we did March 11th of 2022 with our colleagues both in the UK and the United States on implications of what is called responsible research for international business scholarships and practice. I urge you to look at the videos because it addresses, in essence, all of the challenges and provides case examples of how such research can be designed and conducted and then turned into practice. This particular slide here is designed to show the evolution of past and future foci for multinational firms and SDG research. As I indicated, originally, the emphasis was on traditional corporate social responsibility, ethics, and IB. And an extensive body of literature was built. To a lesser extent, that went into business strategy adjustments and performance relating to the SDGs. But it's fair to say that the road ahead is a challenging one. And I'm looking at the time here. I've bulletized some of the challenges for future M&E SDG research. Next slide. I think I've run out of time, and I'll conclude on that. One area of great interest is the notion of greenwashing, which is an all-encompassing notion. I view it as a structural problem. It's the issue of good intentions versus actual performance. And some early research has been done on that. But to conclude my presentation, I think our next MESD research event, which we are tentatively scheduling for December 2023, will probably focus on some aspects of greenwashing. And I call upon you, colleagues participating today, to be on the lookout for the call for papers. Additionally, I take note in passing that we have a history of collaborating with GW and Indiana University CIBERs in putting together a research program that would be the second, actually, focused on innovation and sustainability with an interaction with SDG issues. And that is tentatively scheduled for the third week of September 2023 to be held physically in Bloomington, Indiana, at the University of Indiana, whereas MESD will be probably located in Atlanta or Paris, undecided as of this moment. I think I've reached the limit of my time, and I apologize to Alessio, who may not have the full time, so perhaps the organizer might extend to us an additional 5 minutes. I mentioned in passing the multidisciplinary nature of SDG research. These are the sustainability-related centers located at my university. We are a technology university, so you can see the availability of partners to put together a program. It ranges from a carbon neutral energy solution lab to direct air capture centers, to a center devoted to sustainable systems, the Brooke Byers Institute. So we have a multiplicity of colleagues. We usually try and team up with them. They are technicians of the SDGs. We call on them, and they are very generous in allowing us to put together programs that are very targeted, practical in nature, and impactful in terms of action. Thank you very much. And I conclude my presentation here and look forward to Alessio's and questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Dr. McIntyre. Yes, we are doing well on time. I appreciate that. Our next speaker is Alessio Tay. His talk is Maritime Logistics as a Driver for Achieving UNSDGs, the Global Value Chains. Dr. Tay is working at the Department of Economics of the University of Genoa in Italy as Associate Professor in Applied Economics. His research and teaching activity are mainly focused on maritime economics, logistics, investment appraisal, and the impact of innovation on the transportation sector. Dr. Tay, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. I think you can see my presentation at the moment.
Yes.
I would say it's the United Sustainable Development Goals and their connection with many, with a slight different point of view. That is the the role of logistic in achieving Sustainable Development Goals, and obviously why logistic is relevant in order to do so. I will use especially maritime logistic as a case study, but still I will try to understand if this core function of different production and service industries is capable of allowing us or not to achieve sustainability goals in accordance with the Agenda 2030 that has been cited already. if we think about logistics, I think one of the key questions that we could ask ourselves, if we see a queue, so something that is not working properly within a production or distribution process, what is our first thought? And in my opinion, if we think about the impact, the first things that we think about is delays. The second probably is the liability, who is responsible and how much he's going to pay for that. And therefore the extra costs that we might generate out of that, about an efficiency within our logistic function. Because at the end of the day, if we look at the several researches on logistics, we think about logistics as a core function activity within the production and consumption processes of within our supply chains, and therefore about the competitive advantage that could be generated for a company, for every company, but especially multinational enterprises, because they base their competitive advantage on their capability to create efficient logistics chain and supply chains. And the global value chains are becoming more and more a key component of different issues. Have been already mentioned these before, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. But sustainable long-term competitive advantage is often based on logistic function. That has for many times the crucial element whenever we were talking about logistics. But if you talk about obviously sustainability, you are the externalities elements, and I've been mentioned that is not the primary goal of any private entity probably, but it's still something that we should take care of whenever we see a queue. So what is the environmental impact? Again, not probably the first thought we have, but we need to take care of that. And obviously the social impact, for instance, queue often creates more working hours or different conditions of working, or again, they can cost the job for some people. There might be also opportunities, obviously, but still, the social environmental elements are still to be considered. Often are not internalized properly, but we should consider them. In other economies, MNEs base their operations, the competitive advantage on a series of elements that justify the role of logistics within the production and service organization. Obviously, there are specific advantages of that. Cost driver specialization, finding reasons, regulatory drivers, opportunities, and obviously they turn to be income generators. But what's the link with, well, this nice image that apparently we all use when we want to explain United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? Well, the link is obvious. Logistics can be retrieved in basically every of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in different role. It helps us out to cope with societal, economics, environmental challenges. It's common to both enterprises and citizens. So it's something that can be retrieved everywhere. And it's present in all different regions. So it's quite easy to highlight issues or potential solutions in all different countries that are coping or trying to achieve the SDGs. And obviously, logistics is a crucial facilitator for cashing in related advantages. So it's not just a way to achieve sustainable development goals, but it's also a way to create value. And that's also quite important. From a general point of view, I always like to highlight that logistic operators are huge MNEs themselves. Okay, so when you are talking about logistics, quite often logistics there is an internal function called logistic, but most of the logistics services are outsourced to multinational companies that are providing services worldwide to big companies, and therefore they also belong to multinational enterprise elements. And the most traditional example, obviously, is a big industry that I believe all our friends located in Texas know quite well. That is the oil industry. That is basically all based on logistics operations that can create value. They should but they can also have an issue in terms of sustainability from a multidimensional point of view. Logistics is not just traditional elements when it comes to sustainability, but most of the most recent changes or partners in terms of production, distribution, and consumption are linking logistics with sustainability. I know that, well, I'm assuming that we all have heard about circular economy. The circular economy paradigm basically will change our way to produce and consume and recycle, hopefully having an impact from a social point of view and from an environmental point of view, and it's all based on efficient and modern logistics services. And the product as a service paradigm. When I grew up, obviously, I used to have a lot of LPs and CDs of the most hits around the world. I remember that I had a nice shelf with all different kinds of music there. Nowadays, we are used to just hear about that online. That is a good, brilliant example of the product as a service. So the fact that we are ending in or change the pattern of consumption of physical products obviously is allowed and can be treated by a different way to perceive logistics. So there is an obvious link between logistics and what we can do to achieve Sustainable Development Goal, and that's in my opinion is a really good thing to be highlighted and to highlight every time. From a logistic point of view, logistics, despite its potential role to achieve Sustainable Development Goal, logistic industry is incredibly pollutant. If we think about main countries for emissions, we think about countries that produce a lot and that actually concentrate most of the logistics services. Let's think about shipping. I don't know what you think about shipping. Ships are nice. Cruise shipping is wonderful and quite enjoyable, I would say. But shipping is hardly to be seen as a pollutant industry, even though it's one of the most pollutant industries in the world. Why is that? Because logistics is always perceived as something invisible, crucial, but intangible. Despite these, there is a clear connection between logistic operations and emissions, not just CO2 emissions, but also greenhouse gases and all those gases and elements that are not that nice for our health. Again, sustainability issues. Shipping is estimated to count for about 3% of, on average, of worldwide greenhouse gases emissions. Obviously, that's, again, it's something that for years has been ignored just because a ship is somewhere out there in the sea, not seen until he reaches the port. And therefore, there are issues in regulating and issue in perceiving the perception. The perception is quite important in that case. That's also something that is concerning ports at the moment. So there is a critical issues. Is that there is a sustainability issue, a sustainability related goal, but somehow it's not that easy to perceive. But shipping, maritime logistics is crucial. 80% of our traded goods are actually transported by ships. So there is a huge environmental impact, a huge sustainability challenge, but a crucial role for logistics again. So it's something important, relevant that we need to take care of. Can logistics be a driver for achieving United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? I've partially already answered to this question. So obviously there is a potential goal. The different COP events have proven that a lot of the pledge funds by countries, by international organizations are connected with logistics, adapting logistics and mitigating the impact of logistics, governing externalities. And a lot of new technologies that we are all striving to use, from automated vessel, cars, drones, whatever, are basically logistics related. So there is a huge role for logistics. And a lot of investments that are going on at the moment are focused on one of the key aspects of the Sustainable Development Goal, that is adapting to climate change and mitigating the impact of logistics on the environment. I already said it's a huge polluter, but an invisible one. And therefore, for many times, that has not been properly traced, I would say. A lot of new technology are obviously energy related, the fuel, it's the obvious thing, but it's not the only thing to do. Are those technologies sustainable? Well, if we are thinking about environment, obviously, yes. But if we are thinking about the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that is not necessarily the case. Just because new technology are costly, they might not be accessible for everybody. They can create market distortion. There is a skill that is changing, and you need to adapt to that. And it could create market asymmetries, therefore advantages for some players, for some companies, and not others, decreasing the overall level of sustainability. And logistics, particularly, sustainability has often been connected with green goal, environmental oriented strategy. That obviously is just a part of logistics, not necessarily what we should perceive as logistics. And that is often connected with the cascading effects and the skill shift that new changes in the market and often innovation in the market can create. So mentioning of greenwashing, obviously sustainability is a key element for the future. Logistics will play a key role in achieving United Sustainable Development Goals, but there is a risk of being too much focus on one element of sustainability, leaving behind the other two components of our definition of sustainability. And that could create risks, asymmetries, and inefficiency at the end. I would like to thank you for having me here. I hope you find this presentation interesting, and I'm here for answering whatever question you have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tay. I believe we have a moment to take a question that we do have on the Q&A. Also, if anybody would like to submit additional questions, we may be able to take another one or two. It does not say directly, but this did pop up after Dr. McIntyre's presentation, so I will start there. The question is, I'm sorry, you saw it? I will read it out. So from Mason Manesh, it says, what are the roles of SMEs and entrepreneurial companies to address SDGs? What do you think about future research in this field?
I think it's a critical question because the way we have been using the word M&E in the title of our consortium is reductive in many ways. We do want to mean the private sector, but of course M&Es have the critical mass and the multi-country reach. Now, SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises and startups are clearly the source of great innovation, responding to local problems, specific problems in a given port, for example, in matters of logistics, perhaps. There are some algorithms that would be devised and designed to address particular local specific issues. There is no question that M&Es in their wake, upstream and downstream, carry a lot as suppliers and providers, a lot of SMEs. Sometimes they're absorbed, but we are currently doing some work at the center on the role of unicorns, demicorns, and early stage growing firms in Southeast Asia, not South Asia, but Southeast Asia, countries like Indonesia, to a lesser extent, Singapore, the Philippines, and so on. And oftentimes, very much following the presentations of Meeta, fintech, of course, they are in fintech related issues, but also many of the new startups in emerging frontier economies in South Asia, Southeast Asia rather, address local specific problems. And logistics, of course, is one of them. I mentioned for Alessio in passing that my university, Georgia Tech, has a second business school called the Industrial Systems Engineering School, which is the premier research school in logistics. So while my little presentation underplayed the dimension of logistics, if you are in my university, logistics is at the heart of our concerns. So as I listen to both speakers, I want to extend to them an invitation to MESD 2023 with all manners of support, because I think they represent, on the fintech side and on the issue of investment and the gaps, the financing aspects, and on the logistical aspects, which is critical. I think they represent the best and in terms of the challenges that cut across many of the SDGs. So yes, SMEs critical, no doubt about it, and not enough research on SMEs. And the samples are there, but we have to motivate researchers. So perhaps the University of Florida, Texas, and Genoa and Georgia Tech can provide funding for researchers with a SME SDG focus.
You know, and I'll add to that. I also teach social entrepreneurship and so on. And the great thing about SMEs and SMEs is that they also provide the productive opportunities. And that allows us to cut across a number of SDG goals. That's an important part of why those are really significant.
If I may add, in EU, there are a lot of initiatives connected with SMEs and their role in building up smart cities and how these can actually help communities to achieve SDGs. And that was an incredible series of initiatives because well, John is right. Their role in innovation processes with startups and in tackling specific challenges is incredibly relevant, and they adapt more and faster than bigger companies, and therefore they are incredible living lab for testing certain kind of issues and solutions.
Yeah, absolutely.
In this connection, I wanted to bring to your attention the work of the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. It's a huge operation having roots in the 1930s in the United States. It's not a university, but it's a think tank, a very large think tank, which has a unit focused on sustainability and subnational units, largely meaning cities, U.S. cities, because when the Trump administration decided to pull out of the Pact of Paris, the cities and some of the states in the United States picked up the slack. Probably not sufficiently, but that's where the action was for a long time. It wasn't the M&E for the United States. It really was the cities. And if you look at what's going on in LA, perhaps in Dallas, to a lesser extent in Atlanta, Boston, New York, you have some unique initiatives calling upon a lot of startups and SMEs to really respond to local challenges.
And yet, you know, it is kind of tricky because, as you said, you need that system around them. Yeah. Because oftentimes entrepreneurs are trained to be the rock star, especially in these worlds, not so much in the developing world where the SMEs are really doing subsistence work. But the unicorn types, or at least the aspiring unicorn types, the unicorns do fine, but the ones that are aspiring have an outstated vision of what their impact is, and that's something that impact measurement also needs to address. So the systemic change necessary for achieving some of our goals.
I'm curious to ask my colleagues, what do you view as the most central research issues from an international economics and an international business management standpoint? And you may have a complex answer, or a very simple one. Are there 2 or 3 issues that stand out in your mind that have been insufficiently, improperly addressed by the community of scholars in Europe, in India, in the United States, and elsewhere?
First of all, Carla, do we have some time?
Short. 2 or 3.
2 or 3.
I think we could, we're a little over, but that's okay. I like this conversation, so please continue.
30-second answers, huh? So I think, John, you made an excellent point earlier, and something that we have been trying to work at the Global Sustainability Leadership Institute as well. How do we support interdisciplinary research, because until we don't change the tenure system and its incentives, we're not going to get that interdisciplinary research of the nature that we need. In finance, I think we have been remiss in hanging on to our interpretation of the Milton Friedman dogma. I don't think he meant it that way, but we think about this, and I think we're behind. There are opportunities, and I think research into the opportunities that we can create through the business schools. I'm talking about business schools now. We think about the private sector a lot, but research into collaborations and how those are working and or not is going to be crucial, because these are the problems of today. And I picked the ones that people are not doing enough.
If I may, in my opinion, there is also an issue in, I would say, the scale of the measures and the interaction among the initiatives that could create that could create impacts that we are not able to assess properly or to even consider properly. So we thought about a lot of initiatives that could be creating another capacity, another effort in some way, but could also be quite conflicting. And again, it's also an interdisciplinary issue, because some of these measures are not coming from the same point of view or using the same approach, and therefore we are not able to properly evaluate what those are causing in our society, especially from a future perspective. That is completely understudied. Obviously, an interdisciplinary matter, of course, but it's also the fact that we have different scale and they do not necessarily interact or take each other into consideration, and that could be quite tricky.
I think part of it is also the availability of data that has hampered research, and as those data sets get better, cleaner, and more available, I think it'll be easier to do some research.
And on that, in Europe at least, I don't know if it's an issue that is felt around the world, but in Europe at least, the crucial element is not just the availability of data, but the ownership of data. Because some of the data that are really crucial and strategic are actually owned by players that do not necessarily have an interest in sharing those data and information, or are able to properly use those data. So there is a huge amount of data that are owned and not shared, and their value is not necessarily understood by those owners. And at least in Europe, that is a huge problem.
Yeah.
I think I will go ahead and formally close this out and extend thank you to all of our colleagues, to the presenters and the audience for joining us. And thank you also to the U.S. Department of Education. We are especially grateful for them, because without Title VI funding for National Resource Centers and Centers for International Business Education and Research, we'd be unable to present this type of program for you. So thank you all very much. Have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, evening. And thank you on behalf of all of us.
Thank you, everyone.
You all. It was nice meeting you.
Grazie mille.
Thank you.